Joining me now here in New York are Ayman Mohyeldin, host of Ayman on MSNBC, who has, of course, reported extensively on this region, and Michelle Goldberg, opinion columnist for the New York Times. Thank you guys both for being here. Ayman, before we began this hour of television, you and I were talking about the meaning of these protests in the Arab Street. And look, a lot of these are countries that know how to crack down on protests if they want to. And I wonder whether you think this is a signal that these leaders want Americans and Israelis to see the sort of restive, beyond restive, the anger in Arab countries, or whether there's a legitimate concern that they're losing control of the population.
So there's the short term and the long term. In the short term, a lot of these Arab regimes that are, as you mentioned, undemocratic and are authoritarian and crack down on protests about anything know that this singular issue is probably the one issue where these governments have to give a lot of leeway to protest. We've been living a little bit under a fallacy in the West because we hear about the Abraham Accords. We think that there's a genuine peace treaty between Egypt and Israel because they haven't been at war for 40 years. But the truth is, it's not the kind of peace that exists on the street between countries like you would think France and Germany after World War II. That's not what is on the ground. And so as a result of that, over the years, the Palestinian issue, while it has been pushed aside on the tables of Arab leaders, they talk about it, but they don't really do much about it. The truth is, it has been always a central unifying issue across the Arab world. So when they see the images of what plays out in the occupied West Bank, the settlements, and now the war in Gaza, the several wars, it mobilizes the street in a way that in some of their own domestic issues are unable to mobilize these people. And as a result, it puts a lot of pressure on these fragile governments because they're not going to crack down. They may ultimately, but they're not going to do it in the short term. And in the long term, it just reinforces the image that the belief that a lot of the Arab street has that these regimes are either co-opted by the West or working on behalf of Western interests in the region. They genuinely do not care about the Arab street or Arab identity or specifically the Palestinian issue beyond just lip service. I mean,
and in that way, the timing of President Biden's trip, that it coincided with the strike on the hospital, even though American and Israeli intelligence say Israel had nothing to do with this, the timing could not have been worse in some ways for President Biden because his name is now being invoked on the Arab street in these protests.
It could not have been worse. And I do not recall the last time in my life that an American leader was rebuffed by very pro-American regimes, including the King of Jordan, the Palestinian Authority president, as well as the president of Egypt. Yes, the president of the Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas, did not meet with President Trump and certainly rejected what Trump did. That had to do with the embassy moving. But to see an American president arrive into the region, try to bring some of the major players around a table, and be rebuffed or rejected, I think is not a good look for America in the region. And basically the message that it's sending is that we know what side you are on. We are not going to accept, as we heard today from the president of Egypt or the King of Jordan, what you want us to do. We will not just simply allow you to impose what your outcome of this situation is going to be on us, specifically when it comes to the issue of refugees. The Egyptian president was very clear, basically saying that if you want refugees to be dealt with humanely, Israel should take them into the Negev desert. The King of Jordan, forcefully in English, saying it is a red line. Jordan will not take in Palestinian refugees. Egypt will not take in Palestinian refugees. It's not a humanitarian issue. It's a principled issue that they are taking, that the situation that is playing out in Gaza cannot be dumped onto Arab countries and absolve Israel of the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding there.
Michelle, when you talk about Biden's sort of calibration of how to manage this moment, right? On one hand, he's there to show empathy, to express a sympathetic rage, if you will, at the brutal terror attack, but at the same time issue a word of warning. And I think you so beautifully hit on the sort of contradiction inherent in this moment in your piece in the New York Times, and I'll read an excerpt from it. I can empathize with liberal Jews, both in Israel and throughout the diaspora, who feel too overwhelmed at this moment of great fear and vulnerability to protest the escalating suffering inflicted on Palestinians. It is not fair that events are moving too quickly to give people time to grieve the victimization of their own community before being asked to try to prevent the victimization of others. Nevertheless, as atrocities are piled on atrocities, I hope Jews will attend to what is being threatened in our name. And all Americans should pay attention, given how much our country underwrites Israel's military.
Well, and I do think, I mean, just to go back to this point about empathy, I understand why people throughout the world, and particularly the Arab world, see Biden there literally embracing Bibi and think that these are two governments that are completely hand in hand. At the same time, just kind of knowing Israelis and knowing how they bristle under criticism and also use the often unfair criticism that they get, not all of it, but for example, we see with this hospital bombing, that there was kind of widespread condemnation before it became increasingly clear that the story about kind of an Israeli airstrike looked more and more unlikely. You often will hear when you talk to Israelis, we're going to be criticized no matter what. So, and that can too easily be twisted into, so it doesn't matter what we do. And I really think that the only way that Biden can kind of quietly get Israel to take even the smallest step back, to pause the beginning of a ground invasion, to try and get some humanitarian aid let through, is to kind of show very little public daylight between them, and then to also phrase his warning to them, not, you don't want to make the same mistake you've made before, for example, in Lebanon, but you don't want to make the same mistake that we've made before in Iraq and Afghanistan, to kind of phrase it in that sort of humble way. So I think that is the right message if you are trying to get through to Israelis, but I also understand why that doesn't translate in so much of the world.
Well, right. I mean, and also invoking the specter of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan may be a useful sort of rhetorical tool to convince Israelis, look, we mean the best here. But what it does when you talk about the Arab world, to invoke the specter of that is deeply problematic.
And to stay on the 9/11 analogy, if you kind of play it out over the span of the outcome, the United States wanted to go after Osama bin Laden. They ended up invading Afghanistan, toppling the Taliban, 20 years of war. They then used a concocted excuse of WMDs, which everyone believed and now knows was pushed upon the public as a lie, to invade Iraq. And look at how those two countries turned out. In the case of Afghanistan, the Taliban are back. In the case of Iraq, is an ethno-nationalist state that is predominantly controlled by Iranian-backed Iraqi militias. We got rid of al-Qaeda. What did we get in return? We got ISIS 2.0, and we ended up having years of terrorism across the United States and Europe that still haunts us till this day. So I think, to Michelle's point, which is very important, anyone who's trying to convey to the Israelis, take a beat. Learn from our mistakes. The anger is real. The pain is real. The suffering is real. But the revenge may end up being something that produces an outcome that is much more disastrous. Everybody keeps saying we're not going to, in Israel, everybody says we are not going to return to the status quo. A very important point. But the status quo means, does that include freedom for the Palestinians? Are you going to put Gaza without Hamas under a blockade, or are you going to get rid of Hamas but keep the Palestinians blockaded inside the Gaza Strip in an open-air prison while the Palestinians in the West Bank? It can't just be not a return to the status quo for Israel. Can you give us a return not to the status quo for the Palestinians? And that answer, I have not heard a single person say no.
You point this out, Michelle. The language coming from the right in America is not doing any service to any sort of accord happening in the Mideast.
Well, the language coming from the right, which kind of then licenses similarly inflammatory kind of expulsionist language that you hear coming out of this Israeli government. I mean, even before these, these horrific massacres, you had many people in the Israeli government who talked about, kind of the need to, who already wanted to expel Palestinians from, kind of from the 67 borders of Israel and kind of from all the land of Greater Israel. You already had that tendency. These are people who've, in many cases, devoted their lives, certainly in the case of Netanyahu, to avoiding the creation of a Palestinian state. I mean, that is why Netanyahu, in some ways, has built up Hamas as an alternative so that he could undercut the PLO and he could undercut the kind of secular nationalists. So there's no way that you're going to see Netanyahu oversee, a kind of understanding that the Palestinians, contrary to what Jared Kushner and the rest of them thought, that, this idea that the Palestinians could just be kind of ignored and you could make peace without them and keep this going forever. That's not possible, but he is not the man who is going to be able to transcend this situation.
Which is why it is explicitly being asked, how does this war end and what does it actually mean?